Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Welcome to the SRI 2021 parallel session from Africa, from Future Africa Institute. And welcome to the first session, which is entitled Sustainability Research to Accelerate Innovation in Africa. I'm pleased to introduce you to the moderator, Professor Stephanie Burton, from the Faculty of Natural Science and Agronomic Science, University of Pretoria, but also Senior Professor at Future Africa. So, Prof. Burton, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And good afternoon, everybody. I would like to just welcome you, first of all, to this panel discussion. I will introduce it in a little more detail when we actually start the session with our speakers, but we are going to just introduce to you where we are at Future Africa and what Future Africa is about. And so I'm going to ask Sheikh Mbao to do that. And then when we've had a little description of Future Africa, I'll tell you a little more about the connection between Future Africa and Future Earth. So over to you, Professor Mbao.
Thank you, Prof. Burton. I'm very pleased to say some words to the virtual participant about Future Africa, which is an institute that has been created in March 2019 by University of Pretoria to respond to a very special requirement, a new purpose of doing science, which is systems thinking and transdisciplinarity through collaboration, through interfaculty collaboration, but also through networking to co-design solutions that speaks to the realities of Africa. So Future Africa has been created actually to address the salient need of the continent in terms of sustainability science and accelerate innovation. And that's exactly the topic on which we're talking today. So it has been created on the premises of discovering a new purpose of higher education to contribute to the African Development Agenda, including SDGs, including the African Union 2063, et cetera, et cetera. The second important issue that needs to be shared here is that we wanted to establish Future Africa to have impactful research that really transform the continent, the social transformation, the deep, rapid social transformation of the continent. And we can't do it with having the same structure, which is, compartmentalizing science into different faculties. Transdisciplinarity comes in again as a way to address those issues. And last but not least, Future Africa is there to package science for policymakers, to package science for communities, to package science for society, and make sure that the science we do has an impact on the acceleration of transformation we have in Africa. We have few areas which we're trying to advance the agenda. The number one area is sustainability research. One of the panelists is our research chair on sustainability science. It's how to really create a new dimensions of science that brings a layer of action which is additional to what we know in tradition in terms of science output in Africa, and contribute to the global public good in terms of how science can create acceleration of development and mostly sustainable development. The second area of action we want to put in place is about sustainable food system. One of the panelists also will speak about how innovation in sustainable food system can accelerate food security in Africa, mostly on the human dimension of it, the vulnerable community who are affected by climate change. We are very interested on issues related to health, One Health, People, Health, and Place, which are also new frontiers and nexus between social dimension, ecological dimension, and human dimensions of human well-being. The fourth one is about the connectedness, the networking, and how Africa can be reconnected to itself. Most of the science that is being driven in Africa has been done between the collaboration that exists between the North and the South, not between African scientists and scholars together. So Future Africa wants to create that connection and the opportunity for African scientists to collaboratively work on the African domestic issues that we have. Number 5 is about the global equity, human rights related issues, governance, all those aspects which comes as a soft side, but they are actually the conditions of, under which we can have success or failure of any politics or any development agenda. And last but not least is about how to increase education in Africa using the new technology, making sure that everybody has access to knowledge, creating virtual collaborative framework that brings African scholars to really engage into the African continent agenda and advanced development based on the science we are producing in Africa. This is at the nutshell, Prof. Burton, what Future Africa is all about, but you as a professor here also, you might have some additional information to share to our participants.
Thank you very much, Sheikh. Yes, let me add a few more comments about that. We speak about Future Africa as being a community, and we are very proud of the extent of the community that we have networked across Africa. We also talk about it as a hub and a meeting place. And today, of course, is exactly that. It is a meeting place, albeit a virtual one. But for the members of the audience who are part of the SRI, and of course, part of Future Earth, we have a strong connection with Future Earth. And you will have seen for the introduction to this session that it is, in fact, also about the perspectives from the Global South. Here, we also have a connection, and part of the partnership that is running this satellite event is through the Future Earth Regional Office for Southern Africa. And in the session after this, you will hear a lot more about that. That regional office we call FEROSA, that's its anagram, and we are partnering with them in developing the ideas around this satellite event and a number of other initiatives, all to do with the Global South and the voice of the Global South, which of course Future Earth pays some attention to and is developing at the moment in the transition. So we have also been involved in the Future Earth transition processes, and FEROSA will play a part in the whole of this satellite event as well. I think it's also worth just reiterating that at Future Africa we are developing not only research programs, as Professor Mbao outlined, but we also pay a lot of attention to leadership, and we run training programs and we host training initiatives for research leadership, which we consider to be essential and a contribution to what Africa needs. This satellite event is scheduled over 2 days, and there will be other discussions which take place tomorrow, which will also focus on the Sustainable Development Goals. And you'll hear more tomorrow about the way in which the Global South is responding and the way in which the African continent is responding to the Sustainable Development Goals. Apart from that, I think it probably is worth also just mentioning that Future Africa has as its banner sustainability and equity. And that's why we have what we're talking about this afternoon and how we will develop those ideas through the course of this satellite event. I think we can probably move on and start the panel discussion now. So let me introduce that, and I will serve as the moderator for this panel discussion, and at the end of it, Professor Mbao will pick up and speak a little on the messages which will come from the discussion that we have. So, this Sustainability Research to Accelerate Innovation in Africa discussion, we have 4 experts who are going to speak during the course of this event. The first is Cecilia Njenga, who is the head of the United Nations Environmental Panel for Southern Africa for Business Policy and Innovations on Natural Resources. Our second speaker is Enoch Chikava, who has just reminded us that he is actually in Seattle and very early in his morning. He's the Deputy Director for Country Systems, the Transformation within the Agricultural Division at the Gates Foundation. Our third speaker is Lindiwe Sibanda, who is in Zimbabwe at the moment. She is the Director and the Chair of the Alliance of Research Universities in Africa, ARUA, for the chair there on the Center of Excellence in Sustainable Food Systems. And our fourth speaker is Belinda Reyes, who is at the moment in in Somerset West, just outside Cape Town in South Africa. Belinda holds the research chair in sustainability science at Future Africa at the University of Pretoria. She is one of the other Future Africa professors, and she also is a senior research advisor for the Stockholm Resilience Centre. So, colleagues who are about to speak, our session is titled Sustainability Research to Accelerate Innovation in Africa, although I think perhaps we might have rephrased it a little better by saying sustainability research, sustainability science research to drive innovation in Africa. Now, you are all experienced experts in your respective fields, and I certainly hesitate to give you advice as to what you need to be speaking about, but I did suggest to each of you some questions that you might answer in your talks. So let me just explain to the audience what those questions are and what we are seeking to address during the course of this panel discussion. So the first question that I have put to the speakers today is, what are the innovations in their respective fields that they consider to be the priority needs for Africa at the moment? Innovations across the board, of course, but there are many needs. And the question is, what are the priorities that we need to be paying attention to most? The second question is about the research that needs to be done. What are the key research questions that we need to be asking regarding these innovations that Africa needs urgently? Then the third question is, what research do we need to do to drive sustainable innovation in Africa? In other words, innovation that will be retained and will be sustainable across time and across distance and across the whole continent. The fourth question is how best we can achieve scalable solutions. So how best we can scale up all of these solutions through our sustainability science research. And finally, the fifth question, because of course, Future Earth, FEROSA, Future Africa, we are all, in all of our organizations, looking at how we might influence policy. And the question is, what are the policy interventions that will best serve us to enable us to implement these innovations in a sustainable way? So, colleagues, over to you. Our first speaker is Cecilia, and then after that, Enoch, and I will prompt you as we go through. So Cecilia, over to you. We're interested and delighted that you've joined us and looking forward to what you are going to say. Thank you. I think we are not, are you unmuted?
Yes, good afternoon. I hope you can hear me loud and clear now. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. Thank you very much. Thanks. It's really indeed a great pleasure, and I do feel privileged to have been invited to speak on this panel this afternoon. Just like to start by stating that we are facing three imperatives in addressing both the climate crisis as well as the biodiversity crisis. First, we need to achieve a global carbon neutrality within the next 3 decades. Secondly, we need to align our actions to global finance, as has been promised by the Paris Agreement, including addressing the world's blueprint through climate action and innovation. And thirdly, we must deliver a breakthrough on adaptation to protect the world, and especially the most vulnerable people in our countries from the climate impacts. We do know that the impacts of climate change and biodiversity loss have been more pronounced, particularly in Africa, during this period of COVID-19, where we've seen most African countries projected to lose between 2 and 5 degrees GDP to climate change by 2030. And this is really in conservative estimates. And of course, contractions from COVID-19, about 2.7% initially. We were already off track to achieving the SDGs even before COVID-19. and even the projections to end poverty by 2030 seem, an estimate that really we may not be able to achieve. Food insecurity has also been at a rise in the African continent, and the populations that continue to be affected by moderate or severe food insecurity actually rose from 22.4% to about 25.9% in 2019. And of course, in the last 2 COVID years, we have seen a significant rise in this statistics. The implications of the war, economic recession since the Great Depression have actually been significant. And we are also, again, estimating a GDP per capita decline of about 4.2%, which was really by the end of 2020. So the statistics are quite glaring to us in terms of thinking of how can we explore and implore innovation from both the business sector and of course our public sector policies and community action to be able to address this huge challenge we have even in meeting our SDGs. A very quick mapping of what we are now calling the nature-based solutions in adaptation across the world has indicated that most of the innovations are actually emerging in the developing world, in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And in these areas, we have also seen some sectoral responses and key sectors that are driving business innovations, mainly around agriculture and livestock, and also around issues of water security, looking at issues, addressing human health, biodiversity and ecosystems really coming on top of those innovations in terms of nature-based solutions. We are also seeing some innovations around fisheries, looking at how vulnerable groups are responding and the innovations that they are putting in place themselves or other sectors are putting in place to address that. And unfortunately, in the energy sector, where we are requiring to see much more innovation and uptake, we have had mixed responses and innovations, having pockets, such as countries as Kenya that have embraced the transition to renewable energy in a big way, but of course with the recent announcement by President Ramaphosa saying that over, there will be allowance up to 100 megawatts for small, producers, etc., being a signal that we will see countries that have not been undertaking and moving towards a renewable energy mix that is sustainable, moving towards that. So transport and infrastructure and forestry are other sectors that we are seeing a lot of business innovations taking place. COVID-19 has underlined Africa's vulnerability to external shocks, and these have greatly impacted, and we have seen the Africa region struggling to recover, and the export sector also in goods that, particularly agricultural goods that we highly dependent in, being highly impacted on. So it's not business as usual, and a business as usual model will not accelerate growth sufficiently to the levels that we require in Africa. So the building blocks of a continent that is struggling to recover, we have seen again 3 key sectors, mainly led by agriculture. That's where we need to see more transformation. We've also seen industry and service sectors also coming a second and a third level. The African Ministerial Conference on Environment, AMCEN, has recently spearheaded what we are calling the Africa Green Economy Stimulus Program. And this Africa Green Stimulus Program is very much aligned to the Africa's Green Stimulus Plan that the Economic Commission for Africa is spearheading. And at the core of this stimulus plan is we are focusing on interventions around building resilient infrastructure across the Africa continent, addressing food security, but also very much underpinned by the need to have nature-based solutions at the core of this. We need stimulus programs that are mobilized to address brown investments, but also, of course, not only preserving the status quo where the brown and green investment model have been shown transformation, but of course, moving towards a green economy model in support of a green stimulus process across the African continent. And again, the sectors that we have seen as being strong job multipliers being agriculture, renewable energy, and transport. Just moving forward, I would just like to highlight some of the sectors within the food security and the crops where we have seen a major impact and which would require a concerted effort if we are to move towards the zero hunger SDG number 2. The sectors highly impacted on, and these are really the indigenous crops for Africa: cassava, sorghum, millet, maize, and groundnut being hugely impacted. And these is where we would require to focus our attention, particularly on securing the livelihoods of local communities that are involved in their production. In the nature-based solutions, opportunities for business, creation for jobs that has also been enhanced by looking at large-scale restoration programs and building up on Africa's natural capital. And these include innovations such as the Great Green Wall of the Sahel, the Ethiopia's Green Legacy, and their recent announcement of the Billion Tree program that does not only include Ethiopia, but includes the neighboring countries of Ethiopia, but also the Africa Blue Economy Strategy, and also looking at aspects of ecotourism. And what we are seeing, these are also sectors with addressing food security, but they also contribute to addressing the whole issue around rebuilding and reconstructing Africa's carbon sinks, and at the same time, increasing access to fresh water supply, reducing disaster risk, and also improving inclusion of local communities. I will not underpin or go into detail on the green jobs, but basically mention when we look at business options around the natural resources, one of the aspects is, of course, looking at carbon offsets, but also looking at the low carbon pricing or the lack of clarity, particularly for most of the African countries, and the need for us to build capacity to understand how we can leverage from carbon offsets, from green bonds and other financial packages that are available for us in order for us to leverage and address challenges for Africa, such as increasing the amount of renewable energy generation, forestry, but also clean cooking and clean energy, access to clean energy. We will be sharing very soon, both at AMSEN and also as UNEP, the Africa Green Stimulus Program much more widely as we try to engage and accelerate participation and engagement, not only with countries, civil society, but also with researchers in order for you to contribute to a more robust program for our continent. In closing, in my initial remarks, I just want to underpin some of the points that Professor Sheikh Mu highlighted. The need for us as we move towards understanding and looking for actions that can drive the green pandemic recovery in Africa. First being leveraging on the principle of enabler or the longevity of the impact of the actions we take, and specifically also focusing on the informal sector, which forms over 80% of the workforce in Africa. Secondly, looking at a green pandemic recovery program, and that provides business opportunities and for innovation as a source for socioeconomic opportunities across the Africa continent. And this basically is premised around food security, creating enterprise opportunities, but also expanding macroeconomic growth. Very important is how we can leverage on enabling policies that countries have prioritized for climate change and climate action in their national determined contributions, national adaptation plans, as well as sectoral policies being very critical. We need to look at how we leverage mitigation actions to power adaptation. And a good example around this is around the area of clean energy, which is a mitigation action which could be prioritized for powering value addition actions. It's adding value that wealth opportunity, it's in adding value that wealth opportunities can be created. Thirdly, we are also looking at the whole area of decentralizing solar dryers to individual farmers in the local markets in order for us to increase productivity. How can we link our farmers, the smallholder farmers, either individually as cooperatives to increase their yields, but also at the same time have access to clean energy? How can we also leverage financial innovations? We are looking at the ecosystem-based adaptation standards. We are looking at the perceived high risks of engaging in natural processes and nature-based solutions, but at the same time increasing our yields. While up to 90% of Africans in the informal sector operate outside the mainstream banking system, most of the members of communal cooperatives we have found are weaved into community culture. And therefore, when we work at the community level, we need to take this significant recognition that most enterprises are also linked to culture, behavior, and the way things are done at the local level. We have to work to develop nationally determined considerations that integrate communal cooperatives as a critical financial instrument for climate action in order to ensure that the informal sector financing instruments can be leveraged to drive the green pandemic recovery. But it's really at the core for Africa is prioritizing human capital. We do have a high, a youthful population. We must focus and leverage from this young people across the continent. How can we structurally guide the youth to continually improve, refine, and adapt their skills, their talent, energy, and creativity towards finding purpose in enterprises that at scale are circular, a green economy, and nature-based solutions? We must tap into sustainable production. For instance, we have examples of youth initiatives and youth businesses where they are tapping into the energy sector, developing fuel briquettes and creating sustainable enterprises for a green pandemic recovery, and tapping to the over $20 billion a year charcoal industry. These are all opportunities where our youth can be guided, can be equipped with the right skill, provided with the necessary business skills as well as financial muscle in order for them to engage in this sector. So in conclusion, there are policy options and innovations that can drive this. First, the finance policy landscape, looking at the clean energy policy landscape, but also looking at the national standards that are set and the bodies that are setting these national standards to allow for green products to be part and parcel of the entire landscape of the products that are in our markets. Nature-based solution initiatives, particularly that are driven by climate change adaptation, are out there, are available, but they do require support and a leveraging from policy. We are 5 years already into the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. I must say that progress has been uneven and acceleration is needed in many areas. The world was not on track to deliver the SDGs by 2030, but we do have an opportunity if we leverage on nature-based solutions and offer business options in order for us to drive towards our goal of 2030. COVID-19 indeed has had a devastating impact in the Africa continent across all the 17 SDGs, of course, threatening the achievements that we've already made in many areas. While the virus has impacted everyone, it is the poorest and the vulnerable who have been affected disproportionately by this pandemic. Investments in data, in research is urgently needed to respond to the crisis and support SDG acceleration. A program director, in conclusion, to recover from COVID-19 pandemic, we must put people at the center of our research. We must put people at the center of the responses and the innovations that we bring about in order to achieve a more equitable and resilient outcome for all. The SDGs, the Paris Agreement, the Africa 2060 Agenda are our compass to a transformative recovery that reduces the risk of future crises and brings the inclusive process and the sustainable development process into a realm of what we so much desire. More impactful research is definitely required. We need an integrated approach, and we need to ensure that the sustainability process is equitable and inclusive, and that the innovations we put in place are sufficient in order to drive us towards the socio-economic place that we want to be in the future. Thank you very much, Program Director.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Cecilia. You managed to pack the most astounding amount of information into that short time. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask Enoch Chikaba now if he will give us his views on those points that we made, the questions that we asked. Over to you. Thank you, Enoch.
Thank you very much. It is also a great privilege for me to participate, and I'm even more gratified by the elevation of voices on the continent. Because really there cannot be any meaningful, sustainable development if it is not led by the Africans for Africa. So extremely excited about this opportunity and the work that you do on the continent. But in thinking about priority innovations for Africa, I would like to build upon the wealth of statistics which Cecilia gave, especially on the impact of COVID, climate change, and most recently also the conflict, call it a confluence of calamities, which is really making building back a lot more difficult. But however, we see a lot of opportunities here to leapfrog a lot of these challenges. So in thinking about priority innovations for Africa, I firstly think about the dire needs of small-scale farmers or smallholder farmers who produce 80% of the food that is consumed in urban areas. And we all know that all this work is done mostly by women on the continent. So I think a lot about three things. And with these three things in mind, we need innovations around information, and we need innovations around inputs, and innovations around finance. If I would really boil everything down to three things, this will be my bet in terms of we need more of those information, inputs, and finance. And maybe I will start with the information, and starting with the finite resource here, which is the land or the soil. So information about the soil becomes extremely important because it doesn't grow. You need to be using the same piece of land over and over in a sustainable way to solve your problems today, but also to make sure that the next generations can also use the same piece of land. So I mean, I grew up on a smallholder farm in a family of 11 kids, and we only had 3 hectares of land. And it means we needed to use that land to get what everyone here also needs. You need food, you need healthcare, and more importantly, you also need some income that allow you to purchase the food which you can't produce on the farm. But also more importantly, to have access to education. I'm sure most of the people here know that maybe smallholder agriculture will not make you extremely rich, and I'm sure no need for us to fantasize that. But at least it will lift people out of extreme poverty. and I've seen it during my own life that this is possible. But now turning to the information on soil systems, we have invested in work across the continent to create digital soil maps that can provide precise information on soil conditions down to the farm level. If you don't understand a lot about your soil, it is going to be very difficult in terms of how do you correct, let's say, the acidity of the soil? How do you add new nutrients as they're being mined out every year? And how much do you do that? And I'm sure all these are the center of sustainability. So really knowledge about the soil becomes so important because it provides insights to farmers and how to manage their lands in ways that boost their productivity while improving the health of the surrounding ecosystem. They also guide strategies to develop integrated approaches to maintaining soil health and restoring degraded lands, like adding trees to the farming landscape, mixing with legumes, which draw nitrogen into the soil with the cereal crops, and also planting fodder grasses in ways that prevent erosion while offering sustainable feed. So one of the challenges why small-scale producers or smallholder farmers don't understand a lot about their own soil, which they've been tilling for many years, is actually just the cost of you doing a soil analysis. We have been analyzing also this in terms of finding out why farmers don't actually know a lot about that soil. It is just the cost. For you to get a soil sample and have it analyzed, you get your results back, it will cost not less than $100 per sample. And you need several samples for you to really have a good representation of what your farm looks like. So through innovations in digital soil mapping, using satellite imagery, machine learning, that cost has now been reduced from $100 per sample to almost $3 per sample, allowing the bulk of the African countries to have their own digital soil maps. And I'm sure right now we have more than 7 countries on the continent that have digital soil maps. And now they're sitting on this huge data, which they can now begin to develop several services and solutions, for the small scale producers. And this includes things like spatial modeling, which is helping contextualize agronomic practices. For example, how to increase organic matter, rooting depth, soil water retention, etc. So this is what we call predictive agronomy. Especially this becomes very, very important when the climate is changing. How can you come up with models that can give you a picture of what the future can be? So predictive agronomy will depend by and large on the data that you have about the soil. So we are extremely excited about these opportunities which are possible on the continent. And as you look at, climate change, estimated to increase drought frequency, as we all know, and also be reducing season length by almost 20%. You add now the increase in temperatures, which Cecilia was talking about. All this will reduce yields by a factor of maybe between 10 and 15% in the next few years. And then the next bucket of information where you will need innovation is around the information about the pests and diseases. And here we have also been seeing advances in data science, artificial intelligence, and machine learning greatly reduce the cost of supporting smallholder farmers with disease surveillance and climate forecasting systems. and that can help farmers adapt to several threats that are now being intensified by climate change, which is becoming a major driver of poverty and malnutrition on the continent. Just give you maybe a quick example here in Ethiopia. We have the wheat rust early warning system, which combines insights regularly collected from farmers, field agents, and weekly climate forecast into a central database. And every week, all of this data is synthesized to determine if there is a risk on an outbreak. And if the risk is high, farmers are alerted via text messages, and containment efforts begin immediately. A couple of years ago, the system was crucial to stopping a wheat rust outbreak from spreading. That's a big benefit for smallholder farmers and their families, because outbreaks in 2020 and also 2013 was actually going to be costing the Ethiopian farmers almost $200 million. Then I want to go to the next bucket of information, just information about extension system. I mean, we all know the bulk of smallholder farmers, the majority of them, maybe they have literacy challenges. And so the question is, how do you relay information, what we traditionally call extension? And this depends on the ratio of extension officers to the farmers. And if you just go across the continent, the extension worker to farmer ratio in Kenya, for example, is 1:3,000. You go to Nigeria, 1:10,000. You go to Uganda, one extension officer servicing 5,000 farmers. Tanzania, almost the same thing. Ethiopia maybe has the best ratio today, one extension officer to 472 farmers. So it is just hard. How do you relay information to the farmers? You may know something, maybe there's a better variety, there are better crops, there are better methods. But how do you get that content, to reach the farmers? So that's an area of innovation. How can you bring in disruptive innovations that will make it possible to pass information at a reasonable price so that the farmers can get more timely information, especially during the season? So a lot of innovations are available right now in terms of digital advisory, digital extension. It's still lying different buckets and innovations and applications. Maybe what we are working now is more to have this in an integrated way. And this is the beauty of the times that we live, that we can begin to use all these data sets and build more resilient digital platforms that will be able to deliver this end-to-end, from production all the way into marketing. There's also information about knowing about the markets. Which are the markets? What are the prices? When are they likely to demand the commodities? If you take all that information and you begin to model it and you develop the content, which is simpler, and then you're going to multi-channels, to be reaching the small-scale producers, maybe one-on-one using mobile technology. It might be through intermediaries. It could be maybe even through other organizations which procure commodities from the farmers. So there are multi-channels right on the information. And then I'll jump maybe into also information about agricultural finance. Again, related. Find that the small-scale producers employ rudimentary coping mechanisms to manage sustainable, systemic challenges. And only 3% of sub-Saharan African farmers have access to insurance. And the advances in digital technology, remote sensing, crop modeling, digital payment platforms, they hold a huge promise to put all this data together and then come up with financial tools and instruments that will help small-scale producers, especially bounce back stronger after a catastrophe. So we all know about the index insurance, in livestock in Kenya. We also have that mostly also in West Africa. And we're now looking at how this can be scaled up, which I'll talk a little bit later. But I'll move on now to, to the next bucket of questions where you were curious to know what would be some of the key research questions that we need to be asking regarding these innovations Africa needs. And here I think a lot about inclusivity. You can have good science, good research somewhere else, but are we really responding to the needs of the people who are on the ground, who benefit most from those innovations? So there's the whole question of inclusivity. And maybe the question, does this research and innovations address their most important challenges? And are researchers focused on the innovations that can be quickly translated into affordable and accessible products and services? And here, this is where we require, I think, a lot of the partnerships. I'm sure the buzzword today, it is the co-creation. How do we have those researchers working together with those people that will benefit the most from the innovation? And you find that a lot of these innovations are taking place at a global level. And as you move from the global to the local, there's a lot of innovation needed around partnerships. How do you work, how the universities will work with the national agricultural research and extension systems? How do those work with the local communities? How do you know that the problems you're focused on is exactly what will be addressing what the farmers are? So there's a lot of creativity needed here in terms of what kind of partnerships can you have? And that partnership should be really on an equal basis, that they're also contributing, something into the innovation that will come out of that. So here, maybe just quickly now getting to the what would be some of the research needed to be driving sustainable innovations. And again, here is...
If I could ask you, just to see if you can wrap up, we are getting a little short of time.
Yes, please.
Thank
please go. So maybe let me just go quickly into concluding here, and that all this won't take place unless you have enabling policies. We call it country-led inclusive agricultural transformation. And here the fact is, we cannot be more interested in agricultural transformation than the leaders on the continent. And we need to make sure that we are empowering African leaders to develop their own national agricultural investment plans that are aligned with the most pressing issues of inclusivity, meeting up the hunger challenges. But this goes beyond just the hunger. This goes beyond even food security. So it is at the center of how do you create wealth for the continent. And it may be the lowest hanging fruit that you have is actual agriculture. With a piece of land, you've got labor, and then if you inject innovation in a very intentional way, and we've seen this now starting to take place in certain countries within Africa. So it is possible. You all know that Ethiopia has made progress, Rwanda is making progress, Ghana is making progress. And as we begin to generate a lot of these exemplars, we are going to be sparing innovation on the continent, where we can begin to share some of the best practices across the continent. So maybe just concluding here on this segment, is that there's often discussion of the environmental impacts in food production, and all these things are very real, but farmers should not be seen as an obstacle to sustainability. we are all allies, I think, between those who are innovating and with the beneficiaries. As I said, I grew up in a farming household, and I can tell you that no one depends on nature more than the farmers. They think about the future maybe much more than some scientists, because I've been on our farm, for more than 6 years. My mom is now 82, and she has been on the farm for more than 6 years. And more, she's beginning to understand about her own farm, the rotations that will make the most difference. So at times, because I worked in the sector, I used to bring her some seed varieties, and she'll be telling me, no, I don't want that, I want this. So there's a wealth of experience on the farm, and it's very, very important that we make this connection between what we do in the laboratories, what we do maybe in the cities, and connect that with what is happening on the farm. And I think there is a way to do that. We can leapfrog some of the challenges that comes. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. What an interesting personal view, as well as the high-level expertise. I'm going to hand over now directly to Lindiwe Sibanda. Welcome, Lindiwe. Good to see you, and over to you. If you could keep it under 15 minutes.
Hang on. Thank you very much, Prof. Burton. You introduced me as being in Zimbabwe, but leading the Center of Excellence in Sustainable Food Systems at the University of Pretoria. Yes, colleagues, I am in Zimbabwe, and as Enoch has just said, my whole quest is to be a good farmer. I am farming, and this has taught me a lot of things. We need to close the gap between reality, hands-on farming, and the societal problems that we seek to address through science and through research. So in trying to address the question that has been posed in terms of innovations that I have priority for Africa in food systems, I thought, let me just outline the problem that we face. We have a hungry continent. We have a hungry world. And the situation will only get worse. Currently, the estimate is over 800 million, close to 920 million people go to bed hungry every day. As the population increases, by 2030, we need to be producing 60% more than the food we produce now. By 2050, we need to have increased by 70%. The sad thing in all this is that we are wasting food. So in trying to achieve Sustainable Development Goal, SDG 2, which is zero hunger, we've always thought the solution was increase more food, increase production. But what we now realize is that up to 40%, particularly in Africa, of that food that is produced is put to waste. Now you can imagine globally what that means when we look at 1/3 of all the food that's intended for human consumption that is lost or wasted from the farm to the plate where we eat. So it's both wasted in terms of food losses and waste at farm gate level, but also in the dining table in the kitchen where the food is processed. Now this loss translates into many things. It translates into economic losses, as the food that is wasted will never come back to the table. So it means everything that's gone into producing that food, the food that has consumed about 1/4 of all the water that is used by agriculture, the food that has taken up cropland, which is meant to produce food, but it's now gone to waste. And then the greenhouse gases that have been generated by that food that has not landed on our tables. It's been said that if food loss and waste was a country, it would be the 3rd largest greenhouse gas emitter on the planet, just behind China and the US. So what should we be doing? I believe one of the compelling innovations that we need to be looking at are to do with reducing food loss and waste. And I'll start from my very own farm. I'm farming on a commercial basis. I'm doing mainly cattle, but for the first time, after 3 consecutive droughts that we've faced in Southern Africa with the El Ninos and other drought phenomena, I felt compelled that I should produce at least some maize on 5 hectares for my farm staff. I am not a full-time commercial maize grower, but just because we needed some maize, as Enoch has quoted, for domestic consumption, we just decided to do 5 hectares. What that means is that we don't have the full machinery. Most of the work has been done by hand. But then we were able to put the crop. But the first thing is soil testing. It's still very expensive, and Enoch has covered that. So some of the innovations we need are really to do with Sustainable Development Goal 12, which is talking to responsible production and consumption. Let me start on the production side. So we look at producing the maize, but once it's been produced, we have to harvest by hand. It means removing those stalks and piling them up. Once the stalks have been piled up, it means we have to go one by one, remove the maize cob, pile it up. Once the maize cob has been piled up, we have to transport it from the arable land to the homestead where we store it in a granary. As it is stored, we need to wait until it is sun-dried, dry enough to be processed, to be dehulled, to be removed from the cob. Once it's removed from the cob, we have to bag it either in a metal silo or in hermetically sealable bags, which are not available. So you use your traditional bags. Once you have it in the bags, you have to apply pesticides because the weevils will get into it. Now, all those stages I have described are loss stages, and that's where the up to 40% loss happens over the 3 months harvesting and processing phase. The other station where we experience losses, it's transportation. Because of our rugged roads, it means that there's spillage on the way as the maize bags are hand-sewn, transported in trucks into the collecting bays. But another wastage is also on the processing part, whereby instead of looking at the multiple products that we could be generating out of maize, most of it is just turned into maize meal. Yet we have the opportunity of producing bran, of producing oil, of producing starch, of producing maize meal or liquor. I've learned that in Brazil, they have up to 400 byproducts of maize. And yet in most of our African countries, we no longer have more than 2 or 3 byproducts of all the cereals that we're producing. So what are the innovations that we need? We need to be looking at mechanization that is appropriate to smallholder farmers. We need to be looking at storage facilities. There's been a lot of research that has been done on the use of hermetically sealable bags, on the use of metal silos. But in most cases, when the research is done, there is no complementary policy that allows easy production at local level, easy access, affordability of the technology, and the upscaling of technology. So in most cases, it remains as pilot projects, but can never be taken to scale. And all that means the farmers, the researchers, the policymakers, and the private sector need to be in contact whenever there's a challenge, because after all, we're solving societal problems. So the big innovation that I would like to put across is reducing food loss and waste, because if we could conserve the over 30–40% of the food that we lose, we would maybe not need to produce as much as 60% of what we're producing now to feed the growing population of close to 9 billion by 2050. So what that means is let's invest in research, but let not researchers be going into a laboratory to do the science on their own. We need to be on the farm to articulate the different stops in the production cycle, which need the technologies to meet the problem that the farmers are facing. We also need to look at the financing arrangements for that technology. Will farmers be able to access the technology? I'll bring an example of the metal silo. It was done up in Kenya, and government was clear this is what farmers needed. A 1-ton silo would be able to store enough maize for the family for the year, up to 2 tons. What did they then do? They said no more import duty on on the importation of the metal for producing the metal silo. Who had access for buying the metal? It was the car manufacturing people. So what happened was there were big imports of the metals for producing the silos, but they did not go into silo production. They went into car manufacturing. All of a sudden, government put back the ban because it was not serving the farmer. So the bottom line is they've got to be these multi-stakeholder dialogues where we address what is the problem that we need, what is the research that needs to be done, and what are the accompanying policies and financing arrangements for implementing the technologies that are generated and upscaling them. At the moment, if the technology is sitting on the shelf, it is not serving anybody. And that's why policy has to look at the problem and go full cycle into implementation and monitoring and evaluation of policies. So my big takeaway message is, yes, there are innovations that are urgently required for reducing food loss and waste. They are part of Sustainable Development Goal number 2, which is working towards zero hunger. They are part of Sustainable Development Goal 12, which is talking about responsible production and consumption. But when we are undertaking the research, let's make sure it's full cycle. Let's make sure the voices that need to be around the table are there. Farmers, government for policy, researchers for undertaking research, the financing community, and the private sector for taking the innovations to scale. So I think I've addressed all the questions, Stephanie, that you had highlighted. And I think it's important that these multi-stakeholder dialogues that allow people to know what are the problems and how have they been solved in one country can then be unlocked and adapted for other countries facing similar problems. So that's my takeaway. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lindiwe. That was very clear and beautifully delivered. Thank you. We now go to our next and last speaker, Belinda Reyes, and straight over to you, Belinda, to give us your take.
Thanks so much, Professor Burton. And well, the advantage, or maybe it's a disadvantage, of being the last panelist means that almost everything has been said. And so perhaps what I'm going to do in the interest of time is pick up on 3 or maybe 4 points from the previous speakers and try to address them specifically from the Future Africa Sustainability Science perspective, where we're working to adopt a systemic and intertwined perspective on sustainability and equity in our transdisciplinary research. And as all the previous speakers have made clear, there is a critical need for innovation on the continent, especially in the context of global environmental change and the need to steer away from some of the looming thresholds in our climate and environmental systems, but also importantly to open up new pathways for sustainable development in our food or our energy and urban systems. So firstly, I wanted to pick up on Cecilia's point about the need for integrated, or I would call them systemic approaches or perspectives to innovations for sustainable development. And I think most of the current focus in the developing country context is on technological innovations, many of which focus on things like increasing productivity or similar dimensions or quantities of sustainable development, without much consideration of the social or ecological dynamics in those contexts. And in some ways, these innovations are oriented more towards solutions rather than towards an understanding of the social or ecological problem they're trying to solve, just as Lindiwe was mentioning. So in response, I think we need to look at this growing list of what are called social innovations, which include programs and policies or processes and designs that seek to address a problem and to ultimately do things like shift resources or authority or power asymmetries, routines, and even values that create the problem in the first place. Increasingly, we're also seeing calls for more social ecological innovations, which take promising social innovations, but seek to understand the ecological feedbacks and consequences, such as changes in ecosystem services or water quality, and the consequences of those for the innovation and its intended outcome. And just as Cecilia also mentioned, we're starting to see more of these systemic innovations or social ecological innovations appearing in this area of climate change adaptation in things such as nature-based solutions or ecosystem-based adaptation. And then, of course, there's Southern Africa's very impressive list of water innovations, which include great examples. And this doesn't do away with the need for technological innovations, but when it incorporates these technological innovations in a social ecological systems context or focus, they can become critical tools for sustainable development. Secondly, I thought I would pick up on the point made by both Enoch and Lindiwe about these needs for more inclusive approaches in our research, and what all these questions about innovation mean for research in sustainability science on the continent. And one of the challenges where I see research playing a key role is in developing multi-method and participatory approaches to assess and evaluate innovations before, as well as they start to unfold. Innovations by their very nature and by their definition are disruptors. And as a result, they have winners and losers. And we see this playing out all the time on the continent. And when one considers this unlevel playing field where these innovations are being played out, the challenge here for research is to develop more reflexive approaches to the area of innovation and transformative change that are mindful of these risks to equity and sustainability, and which can help us identify appropriate social and technological innovations in a way that substantially improves both current conditions without diminishing benefits to current and future generations, and which is obviously at the heart of sustainable development efforts. And to this end, I really like the point that Professor Frances Wesley makes in her recent book on social innovation, that instead of always researching the future of innovation, it might be a good idea to also take a look at the history of innovation on this continent and what we can learn from that to guide us in making better choices about innovation in the future. And thirdly, one of the points that Stephanie asked us to address was this question of going to scale, which is one that I think challenges all of us working in the field of sustainability science. And we hear this all the time. We need to go to scale. We need to scale solutions. We need scalable solutions. But when we talk about things like scalable solutions, I think we're mostly thinking about taking one thing that works at a local scale and figuring out how to make it work at a larger scale through things like diffusion or replication or dissemination. And that's quite a simplistic notion of how things actually scale in systems. And I think as colleagues who work in this field of social innovation would have demonstrated, scale can actually work in three different ways. One can scale out, which is this common example of replication and dissemination. One can also scale up by changing policies and laws to allow an innovation to actually scale. And one can also scale deep, which means changing values or beliefs and relationships to allow the innovation to work in more places than just the local scale where it is working. And many researchers in social innovation have highlighted that if we want any large system change, you're likely to require all three: scaling out, scaling up, and scaling deep. And finally then, Stephanie, if there's one more minute, I think in terms of the sort of question about policy needs, I think the recent Human Development Report makes an excellent point about that if we want to steer actions towards the kinds of transformative changes we need to achieve sustainable development for everyone, we need to empower people and therefore policies at all scales to enhance 1, equity, 2, innovation, and 3, stewardship of the environment. And they talk about enhancing all of these, but most importantly, enhancing all of these together. And I think this really brings to the fore that we can't really choose a policy or an action that's good for human development and bad for the environment. And that's really what we've been doing historically. If it's bad for the environment, it's going to be bad for development at some other point, in some other place, or for some other group. And so when it comes to policy innovation, it's really clear that it's not about choosing between environmental and development policies. We really need to move ahead with a very clear-headed approach to development actions, policies, and practices that are good for people, and by that I mean all people, and for the planet. And I'll hand back to you there, Stephanie. Thank you.
Thank you. Very, very beautifully summarized for us, and just exactly what we needed to have to fill some of those gaps. Thank you, Belinda. I'm going to ask Professor Mbao now to give his views on some take-home messages and what we've heard in this session. And over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Burton. It was an amazing set of good points that we heard throughout this session. It will be easier for me to just tell to everyone attending the take-home message are all what you heard from different panelists and go away with those very great information, which will shape a great deal of the orientation we need to establish, particularly in Future Africa, in triggering new layers of science, as I just told you in the introduction, that goes to the policymakers and the decision takers in a daily basis. So in terms of take-home message, it will be very difficult for me to do it, but I just have like 4 great areas which I want to share with you, Prof. Burton and colleagues attending. The first one is the issue of urgency and the importance to really accelerate the set of innovation research that needs to be established in Africa, particularly because the political framework is really established already in Africa. The African Union Agenda 2063, the SDG, and our colleague from UNEP mentioned the green stimulus with the AMSEN. So it means that there is an appeal from the policymakers to get a sense of sustainable innovation to accelerate some of the policies they want to establish on the ground. So sustainability is a new science to address emerging issues in Africa. The second point, and Enoch came to that point, Belinda also several times, is the growing emphasis that we need to put in place in terms of increasing the capacities, not only from the intellectual world, but the capacities of communities, the capacities of users of knowledge. Lindway mentioned the private sector importance and the connection between all those layers to have a really deep transformation that we need to establish. This growing need for frontier science is absolutely something that comes from our different speakers. And the third point, I think, is the biggest chunk, is how to do science for social transformation and how to connect social transformation with ecological transformation. The green development pathway that we need to put in place, UNEP mentioned it, the decarbonization of the development pathways, the acceleration of food production without destroying the natural capital. Our colleague from Gate Foundation, but also Lindway also mentioned that. All those areas are really knowledge intensive, and the type of knowledge that has been suggested into this session are all addressing sustainable energy, sustainable water, sustainable infrastructure, better communication for data, use of new technology, artificial intelligence to reach out to a greater mass of people to apply the type of science we have. And in that very area, I think we all emphasize the issue of data, the issue of accessing information, the issue of building a learning system that allows the communities to access the information and to transform their lives and livelihood in a daily basis. I really like also the great sense of, the purpose of doing sustainability science. If you take example from what Lindway mentioned about food waste and how to improve food waste as a response to the otherwise productive system we would put in place, for instance, for the agriculture, 60% deficit, but already by addressing food waste, we will address 40% of that food deficit without necessarily changing the pressure on land, changing the pressure on water or energy that is put in place. And in that very realm, there is a great deal of opportunities that exist in Africa. They all mention it. The opportunity for getting renewable energies, the opportunities of tapping into the water resources, the opportunities of land, the opportunities of the use, as UNEP mentioned, Cecilia mentioned. And all those opportunities are leftovers from the previous policies that needs to be held back in the process of accelerating transformation in Africa. And finally, I think it comes to throughout and watermark in all those presentations that there were some barriers that needs to be addressed. And one of the barriers was finance. How do we recreate a system of financing development, of greening the development process by having green finance put in place, but also how to put in place national policies that give the right investment for research and development that goes into those different areas of transformation. The last point I want to make, Prof. Burton, is the issue of integration, the issues of inclusiveness, and the issues of equity that came as really the soft side, which is almost forgotten every time, but which means a lot on how we would have a real impact if we want to create the transformation. And on that realm, I really like the conclusion by Belinda Rice about the transdisciplinarity, how to put things together, how to scale up deeper, wider, be far outreach, and create actually a massive, adoption of innovation as a response to the current and future challenge of Africa. It was very rich, difficult to wrap it up in few minutes, but these are the really big highlights, I think, appeared from our speakers, who I thank very, very much for being so inspirational from their talk. And I'm sure the various other sessions coming will be really taking the big points you mentioned here as a sort of food, food of thought for their discussion they will have in the next 2 days to come. Over to you, Prof. Burton.
Thank you. And thank you particularly to Professor Mbao. That was actually a challenge, I think, to try to crystallize all of that. So we have come to the end of this session now. I think we all agree it's been amazingly rich, an enormous amount of food for thought, an enormous amount to take in and to consider. So let me just conclude by saying thank you again to our speakers, who have all made an amazing contribution and very, very widespreading and deep comment on this issue of sustainable innovation. We have this, of course, as the first of a set of sessions that will go on over the course of this satellite event. I hope that you will all listen to all of the rest of them. So let me say thank you for your attention. Thank you to the audience who are all over the world, I think, listening to this. And thank you again to our technical team and to everybody who has spoken in this session. I trust that you have found it as useful as I have. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Thabo Dikgale. I'm here representing the Future Earth Regional Office for Southern Africa, which is hosted at the National Research Foundation and also supported by our Department of Science and Innovation, also hosted in South Africa. Welcome to the session, The Regional Dimension of Future Earth and its Role for a Sustainable World. The main premise and point of departure for the session is to, one, explore the utility of international sustainability programs and their applicability and scalability at a local level. The second objective is to explore the regional dimension of Future Earth, and by extension, of other international sustainability programs with a specific focus on localizing the SDGs in this decade of action. Future Earth's mission is to accelerate transformations to global sustainability through research and innovation, while pursuing a research program designed to provide the knowledge needed to support transformations towards sustainability on a global scale. But how do we achieve this localization when global contexts are so different? In the same breath, the SDGs, unanimously adopted by all member states of the UN in September 2015, sought to provide a common global developmental framework that encompassed a broad range of economic, social, and environmental dimensions of sustainable development. How do we seek equitable sustainable development solutions within an inherently unequal socio-economic paradigm? To this end, there are some objectives and key questions that this session will seek to address. Firstly, we want to draw out key lessons and insights on the SDGs localization from regions and countries on the continent. Second, to explore the utility of regional programs for the implementation of international development agendas, particularly the SDGs. And then to allow for a cross-pollination of ideas and inspiration on localization of international developmental agendas. We'll then discuss some key principles for making the SDGs a reality in Africa. And then we'll conclude by sharing some ideas on how best to fast-track meeting the SDGs in this decade of action. To help us reach these objectives, I will be joined by renowned speakers and experts in their own field. Firstly will be Professor Stephanie Burton, who's the Future Earth Regional Office for Southern Africa Steering Committee Chairperson and renowned professor at Future Africa. Prof. Burton will provide us with a case of the FEROSA study in terms of implementing Future Earth strategies as well as the SDGs. Secondly, we'll be joined by Professor Victor Squires, formerly at the University of Adelaide in Australia. Prof. Squires is a distinguished guest professor at Beijing in China. Prof. Squires will speak and try to provide us some answers. And his presentation is titled, Will the Future Work? And Other Unanswerable Questions. Then we'll be joined by Professor Sunita Faknath from the Faculty of Agriculture at the University of Mauritius. Prof. Faknath will speak on making the voices of local governments and communities heard. And then lastly, but definitely not least, Professor Manfred Langer, who's the director for Future Earth MENA Regional Center, will speak on Future Earth support to attain the SDGs, providing a MENA perspective. So in a nutshell, that's what the session will focus on. Because we are on a limited time, we only have 60 minutes, I will get straight into the presentations. Prof. Burton, over to you.
Thank you. And good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening to everybody. And thank you, Thabo, for that introduction and the invitation to speak on behalf of FEROSA. I'm going to present this through a number of slides, some of which have a lot of information on them, which I won't read, but the slides will be available, and so I will just point you to the information that is on some of them. But let me start by saying, what is FEROSA? Well, FEROSA is a regional center. It's a regional office for Future Earth in Southern Africa. The point about having a regional office is that we are addressing challenges which are specific to our region, posed by the global environmental change and identifying issues around global sustainability, but in a region with a regional lens. So our mandate spans 16 countries in the Southern African region, all of whom are partners in the regional office. We're managed by a secretariat and a steering committee, which is composed of members from across the region. And we are hosted, as Thabo said, by the National Research Foundation, and we do have a very broad Southern African regional remit. Well, what does a regional office do? Well, it's a conduit really for communication and connection among the partners across the region and with the Global Secretariat. So it brings together the partners and it provides the functions of coordination and enables research and capacity building, and then some synthesis and foresight, which is what I'm going to speak about in a moment. So we see ourselves as connecting researchers and societal partners, not only in academic institutions, of course, but across business, policy, government, society, to everybody and to Future Earth. Our role is about coordinating activities, organizing things like workshops, training programs, conferences, launching initiatives, and also connecting our partners with regional researchers and with potential for funding opportunities. So it's very much a linkage, supporting global research projects and running national networks. And that's what we do as a regional office. The membership of FEROSA is very broad. It's open to any interested parties in our partner countries, and that second bullet lists all the different countries who are members of FEROSA. And that just shows you that we are really the focus of a very strong functional office in the Southern African region. And we're promoting sustainability research activities across that. At the bottom, I have just listed on this slide the definition that we mostly adhere to in terms of sustainability as a process for addressing physical, natural, and social resources and the ways in which we can allow the living systems in which humans are embedded to thrive in perpetuity. We've done recently an analysis which we have called a situational and needs analysis, the purpose of which was to explore the sustainability and environmental research landscape across our region, which is broadly the SADC region, and then to define a niche for ourselves as a regional office. In doing that, we've taken a look at all the sustainability policies and strategies that are collated by country and region, and I'm going to speak very briefly about some of those. But the whole analysis had a number of objectives. This is one of the slides I'm not going to read to you, but broadly we asked our consultants to interact with actors and players across the region and to take a look at a SWOT analysis, which I will speak about, where there are gaps, to accumulate for us the stories of what our stakeholders are doing, to create a database, and to tell us about the current research that is going on across the region. The report is available and we can provide it to those who would like to read it. It's very extensive. The results showed us that of the many, we contacted some 800 stakeholders. The major responses came from researchers and research institutions, and then secondly, from government departments and government-run institutions. Then there were, of course, some civil society and private sector responses as well. In terms of the sectors from which the responses came, the major one was from the agricultural and food security sector, and then secondly, academia and research and development, and then science, technology and innovation, the water sector, the environment sector, which is logical enough. But those are the areas that were mostly represented in the respondents. The policies that we took and considered came across all of these sectors which are listed here. So these are the national government sectors broadly, or the regional government sectors, where we felt that these were the critical ones in terms of accelerating transformation, having a role in developing sustainable development goals. Two policies that I just want to mention are these. These are both SADC policies. The first one is the Regional Indicative Strategic Development Plan, which focuses on industrial development, infrastructure development, and social and human capital development, and then also takes into account gender, youth, climate change, and urbanization as cross-cutting themes. Again, there's a great deal of detail in these plans, which I won't go into, but this is one of the major influencing plans for our plan. The other one is the Green Economy Strategy and Action Plan for Sustainable Development, which is also a SADC policy, which is really taking a look across the sector in terms of environmental sustainability, economic well-being, and social equity. And it again is a framework to guide the integration of development across these sectors. When we took a look at what we see across the region in terms of results, we looked for alignment first between what Future Earth Global is doing and what FEROSA partners are involved with. Now, I know you can't read all of that on the slide, but let me just tell you that at the bottom, the white blocks represent what is sustainable research activities going on in the region at the moment. And at the top is what is the Future Earth Global priorities and global work. And as I say, it is available for anybody who would like to look at it. Very broadly, it goes across science and technology, climate change, agriculture, energy, waste management, health, and a few others. And I'll show you some detail of that in a moment. The other alignment that we looked at is the alignment between what is going on in terms of current research activities in the region and Future Earth research activities, Future Earth activities in the region and the current research that we know that we should be focusing on. And again, that's at the top, the global research activities, and at the bottom, the regional ones. And I'll leave it at that because I'm going to give you a little more detail in the next slide. The other outcome of the analysis that I think is important is which sustainable development goals were people in our area, in our regions, were institutions focusing on. And these are listed then in the order of priority that was given in the survey, and the top one is no poverty. And then after that, as you can see, they vary going across the different goals. But the second one is hunger, the third one, health. Again, I leave it for you to take the details, but it does show you that there is a great focus on the SDGs across our region. The SWOT analysis, and here I'm really only going to highlight the major issues that came out of the SWOT analysis. The strengths in particular came out in terms of policy development and policies that we see as being important, and I've mentioned two, there are many others. The weaknesses came out in the implementation of those policies, and I think there's a very important message there. The opportunities are also around national policies and regional policies and innovation across the region. And then the threats, the main one came out as being a lack of political will, which is, I think, a very important message. We have delved into these much more deeply, but I think there's some very important messages there. Look at that. In each of those segments, the word policy comes up. And that shows the importance of a regional office speaking to policy. So we took from that analysis some proposed regional research and development focus areas, and here they are outlined with some detail. They are, I think, fairly clear. These are the ones which came out as being related to the sectors, the government sectors, the national and regional sectors, and where we see opportunities for research to contribute, first of all, to sustainable development, and particularly to policy development. So, FEROSA then has a strategic plan, which is based on the outcomes of that whole analysis. We have two main goals. The first is to develop the capabilities of stakeholders and institutions in global sustainability science for the Southern African region. And we look at that as promoting transdisciplinary research, connecting global change and sustainable communities, and advocating for funding and capacity building. And the second goal is to create a closer interface between the sustainability science and policy actions for the benefit of and in consultation with our broad society. And the objectives there are to increase awareness of regional policies and initiatives and activities, and to foster the partnerships and networks which will allow us to speak to policy and to include a range of stakeholders in developing all of those aspects that we have identified. So there's our strategic plan in one slide, and of course, very much more to unlock from all of that. So the role of FEROSA is going to be to foster research, to support transdisciplinary research across all of these challenges these regional challenges, and to support national and regional scientific research initiatives, which will be aligned with those research themes that we've identified. So our engagement will be with our people and partners. We'll provide a platform for science to policy and practice engagements. We'll foster engagement with key actors, and we'll connect researchers and societal partners. And if we do nothing else, I think that if we are successful here, we will have succeeded in our strategy. I also think that we are fostering broadly a regional future Earth vision, and of course, that comes back to our basic partnership and representation of future Earth. And that's what I think we need to focus on, and I leave you with this beautiful picture of our city. This is a picture of Pretoria at a time in summer when the jacaranda, the famous jacaranda trees are flowering. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. Burton. And I have to say congratulations, to you and the steering committee in their absentia, as well as the Secretariat and the support that you're getting from the NRF as well as the DSI. I think in a short space of less than 2 years, you've already achieved so much. And we're looking forward to seeing what the strategic plan looks like and how we can address some of the challenges that we do face in the region. I do have some questions, but I'll reserve them for later in the interest of time. And at this stage, if I may invite Professor Squires to come and present Will the Future Work and other unanswerable questions. Professor Squires, over to you. May unmute your mic.
The mic, I'm sure it's unmuted.
We can hear you now, Prof.
Okay, sorry. Thank you for the invitation. I hope that I can use a few minutes to share a few thoughts about this terrible future. Will the future work? And that is an unanswerable question, but we all have faith that it might work out okay if we work together, do some of the things outlined by Professor Burton, use our research and our ingenuity to make it work. So, let's find the next slide. We can't find the slide. They've all disappeared. No, of course we can find the slide.
We can see them on our side.
Okay, that's good. Yeah. Right. So there has been a lot of human life and a lot of economic damage done in the last few years, some of it due to natural disasters, earthquakes, floods, the global pandemic, seasonal water shortages and drought. All of these sort of things may not be preventable, but their human impact can certainly be mitigated. And so we need to be thinking of strategies in our planning for the future as to how to make things better. We often, when I was a child, we talked about scientists solving problems. And often I came to learn later in life that rarely can we solve problems, but we can certainly make the situation better. So situation betterment is one of the things we can do. Now, because of these SDG goals, obviously countries in the global south have ratified very big number of environmental treaties. They've set up regional cooperation and tried to get a more integrated and comprehensive approach. And within the ecological arena, we have work on the environment and the energy and the relations between the two. And there is also considerable discussion at the political level about a specific convention on environmental cooperation. This was reaffirmed in the Thimphu Declaration on Climate Change in 2010. And the discussion on that matter is still continuing. One area where regional cooperation could be further explored is for strategic knowledge platform for climate change. There are a number of groups already established, Some of them were set up under the Copenhagen Climate Change Summit as far back as 2009. But climate change seems to be a growing concern, and there is much more consensus now about its magnitude and its likely effects. But food security, which was mentioned by Professor Burton, is a serious matter. And I think that one of the aspects about the future is that trade can be made one of the weapons against food insecurity. Obviously, water resources, I mentioned them in the first few comments. Water from rain, from drying up lakes and rivers, from depleted aquifers. All of these water resources relate to food consumption. And about 70% of the world's water is used in agriculture. And there are a number of countries in the global south that are going to be very severely constrained. They won't be able to find food and livelihoods within their national boundaries. So we have to think about how to use trade as a way of overcoming this problem. And I'll just mention a bit more about that. Food security, water diplomacy, things like transboundary rivers. I've done a lot of work in Central Asia, and there, of course, in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, and the neighboring country of Turkmenistan, some of these transboundary rivers are a big problem. And the lakes like Lake Balhash and Aral Sea, of course, are drying up at an alarming rate. So we've got to think about water as a very scarce commodity. And one of the ways that trade can come in is this concept of virtual water. It takes about 30 tons of water to grow a ton of wheat. Therefore, it'd be a lot better for some countries to import the wheat, let the other country that has produced the grain use up its water and save the water in the home country for other important things, including urban areas and other important industry-related uses. So when we're dealing with water scarcity, we may be able to come up with trade products from areas where water is more efficiently utilized, rather than, as in some countries, spend a lot of money on water transfer schemes and systems. This virtual water concept needs to be explored a lot more. For instance, this shirt that I'm wearing, cotton shirt, a lot of people think, oh, that's very environmentally friendly, a natural product. But in fact, the growing and the processing of the cotton to the point of it being a shirt is looked at about 12 tons of water just for one shirt. So it's quite a serious problem. Let's see, we've lost our gadget. No, maybe not, sorry. So the key to food security then, particularly under this changing climatic situation, is the development of regional trade pacts that allow food flows. Trade, I know this is probably news to a lot of you, but trade will be an essential aspect of alleviating food security. A few years back, there was quite a lot of food shortage in South Asia and Southeast Asia, and the problems could not easily be solved, even though there were surpluses in some parts and acute shortages in others. So we need to think in terms of food security being a fulcrum of various initiatives, could be linked to the broader development and to the trade agenda. And it's an important strategy for fostering regional environmental cooperation and it ties in with the broader strategy of developing the kind of adaptive responses to climate change that are gaining traction in related areas. So we need, if I leave you with one or two take-homes, I think one of them must be the need to look more carefully at all of the levers, of which trade is one. Now, the vision, the future vision, whether it's future Africa or future world or future anything, vision is to enable countries to successfully address global change challenges. And we think in terms of science-based response strategies and the taking of measures. We think in terms of applying science, and policy was mentioned by Professor Burton, and also building the scientific capacity. Capacity building is a very important thing to do. So the efforts of Future Earth as one major organization and the myriad of scientists, investigators, and supporters can do much through their initiatives like the reimagining climate change adaptation and its other programs which are specifically about sustainability to ensure the wise use of resources, to ensure the continuity, and particularly to take into account the important aspect of intergenerational equity, to make sure that our children's children and their children actually have something to support them in a way that prevents them from starving and being in perpetual poverty. And so these remarks, I hope, will stimulate some discussion, and I look forward to the question and answer session a little later. So back to you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Squires. I think you provided us with a rather dim but very accurate reflection of where we are, within this climate crisis and the global challenges that we face today. I think, we can get into sort of the habit of growth patterns, counting GDPs, looking to always grow. So you introduce a very, acute dimension of production and consumption systems, which force us to rethink how we look at growth and how we look at our survival and just being on this planet. I think the question that you raise is not necessarily about increasing production or even consumption, but rather how about we use what we have more effectively to look after the environment and also explore other growth paradigms as opposed to your conventional GDP growth models. Thank you so much for that reflection, Professor Squires. At this point, if I can invite Professor Vakneth from the Faculty of Agriculture at the University of Mauritius to bring us closer to sort of localizing the SDGs and having strategies that we can look to put forward towards communities on the ground. Professor Vakneth, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Let me start sharing my screen. Okay. So, as we know, the Sustainable Development Goals were agreed upon by member countries in 2015 after an extensive, broad and inclusive process of thematic consultations with national parliaments of the member states, the local authorities, civil society organizations, citizens, researchers, and private sector actors around the world. Through this extensive and all-inclusive process, the SDGs, unlike the earlier MDGs, ensured that a wide range of voices, right from grassroots level to the highest national authorities, were heard. And this set the scene and also set the example for the inclusive and integrative approach to the global transformation that the Sustainable Development Goals aim for. Another key feature of the SDGs is their linkages between goals, targets, and indicators, which makes for a complexity that cannot be achieved by governments alone. It needs the participation of all sectors of society, including the corporate sector, SMEs, informal businesses, NGOs, civil society bodies, academia, as well as the general public at the local level. This localization demands a community-specific but inclusive approach that works at local level to reach the ambitious global developmental agenda. Think globally but act locally may be a cliche, but one whose realization is imperative in today's world. We need to create the space for a true and open dialogue with multi-stakeholder participation that operates against a healthy backdrop of a mutually supportive and respectful relationship among all players. Achieving the SDGs is directly linked to the capacity of local and regional governments to ensure populations' access to the basic services necessary for life, such as adequate housing, water, sanitation, education, food, mobility, and health. In fact, the Sendai framework acknowledges the role of local governments as the primary responsible authority during disasters. The concept of stakeholder participation is changing from being simple consultation to actually sharing decision-making, sharing authority, and sharing the power to take action. Even the Decade of Action, which started since January 2020 and is meant to accelerate progress on the SDGs, is built on 3 levels of action: global action, local action, and people action. While a gradual move towards decentralization started since several decades in many countries, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought the role of local governments and communities forcibly to the forefront and highlighted the crucial role they can play to help and support citizens, to ensure provision of basic services to the people, and in general to act as key allies of central government in maintaining law and order, and also providing counseling and emotional support to people, to vulnerable people when needed. In many areas, local authorities and civil bodies have more than demonstrated their ability to help bring about rapid and transformative changes in society in a number of ways. The keystone of the Sustainable Development Goals is leaving no one and no territory behind. And local governments and communities are the active drivers and the active realizers of this principle. The COVID-19 crisis has highlighted the importance of solidarity for ensuring sustainable development, which means that inequalities cannot be allowed to continue. An innovative and key aspect of the SDGs, and especially the reporting process, is the preparation and dissemination of voluntary local reviews, the VLRs, which are submitted together with the voluntary national reviews, the VNRs, to the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development of the United Nations. The HLPF meets under the auspices of the UN Economic and Social Council annually, and all UN member states, as well as representatives from civil society organizations, participate in its meetings to adopt intergovernmentally negotiated political declarations. So which means this serves as an important platform for civil society organizations to make their voices heard. The voluntary local reviews, the VLRs, are an important tool to review and follow up implementation of the SDGs at the district level, the municipality and community levels, and also serve as a vehicle to making the voices of cities and local governments heard in the discussion of the SDGs at global level. The VLRs actually have no official status, but the process of undertaking these subnational reviews is providing multiple benefits to the entities engaging in them and to SDG implementation at large. They help to share experiences, good practices, success stories, lessons learned, and also help to draw the attention of stakeholders to resources that can potentially be used to address challenges and also open avenues for new partnerships to address any current shortcomings that government, local governments, and communities may be facing. Another advantage of the VLRs is that they provide a platform to detail to the government, national authorities, and regional and international communities the large number of actions and successes they have achieved. Okay? This information, which usually may not even appear in the VNRs or other reporting mechanisms. Therefore, by engaging communities in the process, Governments can help to get feedback on and thereby strengthen the accountability and inclusiveness of their policy making. So integration of VLRs into VNRs can also help to improve accountability, transparency, and public ownership of the implementation of the two agendas. In 2020, 6 pilot countries presented voluntary subnational reviews. These were Kenya, Mozambique, and Benin in Africa, and the other 3 were Costa Rica, Ecuador, and Nepal. With the support of the United States cities and local governments networks, local governments and communities in these 6 countries were empowered to collect evidence of SDG localization and create their own reports, and also present concrete proposals to boost local action. This not only contributed to the overall strengthening of the localization dimension in the VNRs developed for their country, but also helped develop the capacity of the local bodies and communities to think and act independently and to make their voice heard. On a different note, local authorities and communities need to be educated and trained to come forward and speak out. While in some countries, local government associations are engaged in partnerships with civic organizations, private sector, academia, and international institutions that support the SDGs, in many countries, this is not the case traditionally. And usually what happens is one often sees the same handful of persons coming forward to speak out on behalf of the community and who may or may not truly represent the voices of the community. There is therefore a need to sensitize the people at the grassroots level, to educate them and build their capacity to make their ideas, concerns, and opinions known. This will help provide new perspectives and new ideas for policymakers. It will help make policies more relevant to the communities and more effective. And it will also help to co-create a new framework of governance that is meaningful and practical in the day-to-day lives of citizens. Let's look at some of the challenges faced by local governments and communities to be more active in SDG implementation. And these include, as listed here, inadequate linkages and coordination between and with national governments, high political turnover and changes of administration, poor policy coherence, insufficient investment, particularly in infrastructure, inadequate monitoring and evaluation, limited local and stakeholder interest and awareness, and this therefore then leads to limited participation. As has been seen in several countries, many local governments do not understand the SDGs. They do not find them relevant to their day-to-day lives, or sometimes they see them as a new burden of work that does not fit in with their local priorities. So what do we need to do? What can we recommend to strengthen the SDG localization process? We need to establish or strengthen new governance frameworks. We need to increase the autonomy and capacities of local government bodies. We need to ensure adequate resource mobilization. We need to have better mapping of national projects related to local organizations. We need to improve the coordination between local and national agendas. We need to improve planning processes and tools, foster civic participation, reinforce decentralization, ensure effective management to catalyze territorial development, support local monitoring, facilitate the exchange of good practices for SDG localization, provide adequate financial, technical resources, and capacity building of local competencies. It is heartening to know that as at 2020, 168 countries have submitted their VNRs, and some have submitted the second and third ones, building on the lessons that they learned from the earlier ones. Now, when you consider that these were prepared during the difficult times that we all faced, or we are still facing with the pandemic, this is really commendable, as it shows the commitment and determination of countries to the implementation of the SDGs for the benefit of the planet and for our own survival. So with these words, I thank you for your attention and I look forward to more discussion later on.
Thank you very much, Prof. Sunita. It seems that we will have some time, at least to have a discussion on the topic. Unfortunately, Prof. Langer from the MENA region could not be able to join us due to some connection problems. However, we will make sure that his presentation is also available for you to download and view at your leisure. Prof. Sunita, if I can come back to you, quite briefly. You mentioned that the keystone of the SDGs is leaving no one and no territory behind. This speaks to the concept of just transition. But the question I want to pose to you is, how do we achieve such a just transition that leaves no one behind while we're maintaining the same current growth paths, which we have seen, may exacerbate inequality and even unemployment? As innovations emerge, as mentioned in the previous session, there are winners and losers. So how do we get this just transition where we leave no one behind and no territory behind while we maintain the same growth paths? For example, could we explore, concepts such as degrowth as an option?
But I would say a different kind of growth, a growth that is more sustainable, that is more respectful of the environment, more respectful of each other, more respectful of society. And of course, everybody has to play their part. I mean, the present models that we have, the corporate models, the capitalist models, have to, I wouldn't say be removed, but definitely need to be changed to be more geared towards a more equitable society. And actually, the SDGs do cater for that. I mean, if you run through the whole gamut of all the SDGs and their goals, you will find that there are these elements that, if applied as they should, would ensure equitable growth. So that I wouldn't say degrowth per se, but rather growth in a different way, in a more respectful way.
Thanks, Prof. Nita. So growth that does not only look to line the pockets of the few, but growth that would actually advantage people on the ground as well as the environment. Now, I think in all three presentations, there's similarities that come out, Prof. Burton. We speak of cooperation between different parts of society, different parts of academia, if you like. Words that are being punted around are words like the quadruple helix approach, and we need to consult more with civil society, academia, people on the ground, etc. Now, FEROSA has taken a good start. FEROSA has managed to, at least in the situational analysis, reach to different pockets of society, and to reach people on the ground that we do want to service. But this quadruple helix approach is easier said than done, right? So how do how does FEROSA see itself, bringing all these parts of the community together in pursuit of the SDGs themselves, but as well as FEROSA's own strategy?
Well, thank you. That's a very big question. I think that FEROSA has at least started, as you say, that process by involving itself with a very broad stakeholder platform. So the consultations and discussions that we have do include representatives from all those different sectors. We've attempted to be very inclusive in the way in which we consult. Having said that, I think one of the other very important aspects that can help is recognition by regional structures. So having the opportunities to speak in conversation with structures such as the SADC region structures. So rather than simply representing a country or representing a community, we can show that we have integrated, that's a word we've used a lot today, integrated views and contributions from sectors across our region at many levels. And I think the visibility at national and regional government level is critical. So I think one of the things FEROSA needs to do is to make sure that we continue to lobby and advocate through our networks within the national and regional government structures, as well as with academia, as you say, and with industry and so on. It's not something that's easy, and it's not something that happens overnight. But I do think that the voice is important, and having a cohesive voice which represents many, many different organizations at least wins us the attention of some of the government bodies. And I think we've already seen that, and I think that will grow.
Thank you very much, Prof. I think, you mentioned a lot of, very good points around voices, that need to permeate through global structures. There's even this discussion itself is framed around how we can sort of be at a situation where we can take stuff at a very high level, at a very global level, without necessarily consulting on these issues. And I think it's very important that we try and find at least, some mechanisms that will allow, these voices from the periphery to come in and influence decisions at a global level. And Prof. Squires, this is a question that I want to put to you. And I'll have a preamble before the question itself, just to provide some context. But the UNESCO Institute for Statistics estimates that Asia has over 4.5 billion people, Africa over 1.3 billion. Together, these regions support more than 75% of humanity. By 2100, these regions will be home to 83% of humanity. And yet these two continents have between 1/10 and 1/20 of the number of researchers per capita as exist in Europe and North America. Isn't it time, Prof. Squires, that these grand, global developmental initiatives, such as the SDGs and other frameworks, be driven from the Global South by people that are most affected? I think you mentioned food security as an issue that will definitely influence the Global South. What is the role that intergovernmental institutions can play, for making this happen and making sure that the Global South really drives developmental agendas for issues that affect them directly? If you can unmute Professor Squires. We can't hear you.
Okay, so is that better?
Yes, loud and clear.
Right, sorry. Yes, you mentioned earlier about the difference between things like development measured by GDP increase and by other economic factors. And I think that there is a great deal of need in some of these south cooperative efforts and even north-south ones where funding is provided, expertise is marshaled, plans are made, to take a much broader view than maybe the OECD or the Asian Development Bank or one of the other, World Bank or one of the other multilateral agencies does. So things like population stability, even policies like China had with the reduction of their family size, things of this sort. And these are very controversial, any attempt to regulate the number of people. India, for instance, has very quickly overtaken China as the most populous country on earth. And the policies in India and those in China are very big contrast. So we need to have these other dimensions, not just the GDP, things like inbuilt sustainability, ensuring that poverty alleviation, income distribution, things like food security, things like taking advantage of the principle of virtual water and having this in our trade balance, trade agreements, so that countries like Argentina, Australia, as Canada, produce grain from largely rain-fed sources, don't require a great deal of water to be used compared with, say, the high-intensity irrigated croplands, growing grain using water that's not all that effectively used. There are many factors which need to be taken into account in both the planning for sustainable future, but also to better mobilize. I think Professor Burton made the point that not only are you looking at government agencies, government ministries, but also the private sector. So there's room for people to invest their money in things that from the private sector, and things like carbon capture and some of these other incentives also come into this equation. So we need a broadening, if you like, of all of the interacting factors, and particularly to concentrate on that important nexus between food, water, and energy, those sorts of things. I'll quit there. You have other things to ask?
Thanks a lot, Professor Squires. I think definitely, the issue of population control or depopulation, as other people would like to call it, is definitely very controversial. A lot of, schools of thought, lean towards the idea that, you're human, your people are your most important asset, and you need to cherish that. Another part of the discussion is that, there is definitely enough in the world to maintain all of us, but there's big inequalities. A very few, enjoy many things that should be actually be shared, around for everyone else to enjoy. So it's an issue that we'll definitely delve into later on if we do get a chance. Prof, if I can come back to you, on the issue of representation. And ideally, we're looking at the SDGs from a global lens, trying to bring them down to a local level. Institutions, and programs such as Future Earth aim to support that linkage from a global down to the regional and essentially down back again, to the community level. At the moment, structures such as the Middle East, North Africa region, as well as FEROSA, do not, for a lack of a better word, don't have the required representation to make impact into the strategic direction of programs such as Future Earth. Now, we know that there is a transition process that is unfolding at Future Earth at a global level. What opportunities does that transition represent for institutions and organizations such as FEROSA, the MENA region, the South Asia office, etc.? What opportunities can these kinds of centers explore to ensure that the global voices of the global South do reach the echelons of global power?
Thanks, Thabo. That's, I think, an important question, and one which I think Future Earth has been grappling with for quite a long time, through the period since they initiated the transition that they are operating in at the moment. There has been an emphasis on the need to have the voices of the so-called global South more inclusively involved in the deliberations of Future Earth. I think that goes in two directions. The planning that has gone through Future Earth's transition, or has been involved, has taken into account, for example, the role of national and regional representative groups, that sometimes they're called committees, sometimes they're called offices, but there are national and regional sector representation groups who can be a part of the Future Earth governance and a voice into the structures, and that's one direction. I think the other direction is the opposite of that, and that is that wherever you have some kind of representation by a body, a committee, an office, it's really critical that those entities are able to spread their contact and their community reach, if you like, into quite a lot of detail. We've heard quite a lot this afternoon, actually all afternoon, about the importance of listening to the voices and stories of people, and taking into account not only what we see as high-level society and corporate voices, but also listening to experiences and the stories that people tell and the impact of various interventions. So I think there's a responsibility for the representative entities to be making sure that they do gather the input right down to a very basic community level as far as they can, and that they then channel that into the Future Earth assembly structures, which will allow us to have that voice and to tell those stories.
Thank you very much, Prof. Burton. I think you make some very good points, that there needs to be more effort for us to reach down to the communities. And I think it goes beyond just mentioning them, in situations such as this, which I would argue are largely for the privileged few, who have access to these platforms and then can then share their voices. A lot as well has been mentioned, especially in your presentation, around us having all of these, policies, very good policies, I might add, but a definite significant lack of, of implementation. Prof. Squires, spoke very seriously about the issue of water, as well as food security, and how we sort of need to rethink, ways around, the production of those materials, the production of food itself, as well as the consumption. Now, a lot has been said about, as well as localizing the SDGs at a local level and the different structures that exist for communities to contribute to that process. If I can just go back to each panelist to just provide a 30-second takeaway message from your side, and to those of us who are watching this from across the world, please also do type in your questions in the chat. We will try and attend to them, and we'll definitely make this recording as well as the presentations available to you. So if I can start with Prof. Sunita, just 30 seconds to 1 minute of your takeaway messages.
This whole forum is about sustainability, research, and innovation. Now, research and innovation, all this is done by people. One of the problems we have in Africa is, in fact, I would say one of the real big problems is that of brain drain. And this is something that governments have to address. We talk about it in different forums, but what exactly do we do? How do we implement? What do we implement to bring back our bright minds? So that is one of the issues that really we need maybe a separate forum to discuss the whole issue of bringing back our elite, to bringing back our scientists and our researchers, because these are the ones that are going to do the research, the innovation that will allow us to meet the SDGs, to allow us to have the society that we want.
Thank you very much, Prof. Sunita. Professor Squires, over to you, and then I'll conclude here at Future Africa.
Okay, so this time the microphone's on, hopefully. Yes, I would see some importance in incentivizing the people who organize these multilateral and bilateral cooperation programs. Need to incentivize the local people by ensuring that the benefits which we can see might flow, the benefits actually get to the people who are expected to make the sacrifice, to wait for some improvement in their situation. And my experience over many years is that land users won't change their methods unless they can see a benefit for themselves within a relatively short time. So incentivize, that's the thing.
Thank you for that, Prof. Squires. Prof. Burton, 30 seconds.
Thank you. Yes, I think the messages I'd like to bring back now really are around the importance of information, evidence, the importance of cooperation, and the importance of consulting. If we can make those things successful, then perhaps we have a chance of actually succeeding with implementation of our policies. And I think that information flow needs to go in many directions.
Thank you very much, Prof. Burton. I think from my side, just a thank you to all the panelists, Prof. Squires, Prof. Sunita, Prof. Manfred in absentia, and Prof. Burton. And to all of you that are watching this from across the world, sincere thanks for joining us. I can only hope that you were both, intellectually stimulated, but I also hope that you got some messages, that may inform your strategies at a local level, but may also force you to think differently around the current, crisis, whether it's global change, whether it's a climate crisis, around the situation that we find ourselves in. And hopefully in future, we may, find that situation betterment as advocated by Professor Squires. From Future Africa in Pretoria, thank you very much for joining us.